Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. If we haven't met, I'm Julia Jaquette, professor in the Fine Arts Department, and this particular season of ARTSpeak, organizing it with Professor Jason Stopa. So again, welcome, and we're in the midst of ARTSpeak 2024-2025. And in this series, we invite contemporary artists to talk about their work and their artistic practice. And this afternoon, artist Oasa DuVerney is our speaker. This particular ARTSpeak lecture series season was co-produced by the Fine Arts Department, the History of Art Department, Art History and Museum Professions, and the Art Market Studies program. You can see previous ARTSpeak lectures if you Google ARTSpeak and FIT. And today, we would like to enthusiastically thank Professor Susan Daykin for her generous support and commitment to this program in creating the Daykin Fund for the Fine Arts Department and for making these events possible. So if you would, please join me in thanking Sue Daykin. It's really been an incredible boon for our department. We'd also like to thank heartily Patrick Nicely, the Dean of Liberal Arts, and Troy Richards, Dean of the School of Art and Design, for their support of this series. We'd also like to thank the Chair of Fine Arts, Stephanie Pierce, and Professor Amy Werble, who is in the History of Art Department. And are you the chair? No? Okay. Just want to make sure I get it right. So today's speaker, Oasa DuVerney, is not only an accomplished artist and art educator, she is a graduate of the Fine Arts Department here at FIT. Yay, that is so satisfying to say. Oasa's work is in the permanent collection of the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is currently featuring her work in Flight into Egypt, Black Artists in Ancient Egypt, 1876 to now. She was recently awarded a New York City Percent for Art Commission to create work for the Brooklyn Public Library Eastern Parkway branch. She also runs a collaborative public art project, the Brooklyn High Art Machine, with artist Mildred Beltra, which explores art making as a community building tool. She received her BFA from FIT and her MFA from Hunter College and is currently an assistant professor for the School of Art and Design at Pratt Institute. I'm so pleased to introduce to you Oasa DuVerney.
Hey y'all, how's it going? Ooh, sorry, I hate my voice, but I hope you like it. I'm Oasa DuVerney, and this is a Black Power wave. I want to start with a quote by James Baldwin, one of my favorites. It's from a forum in 1961 on nationalism, colonialism, and the United States. Baldwin says, "I'm trying to explain that I, speaking now, again as a Black man, have been described by you for thousands of years. And maybe I loved being described by you. But time passed, and now, whether I like it or not, I can not only describe myself, but, what is much more horrifying, I can describe you. It is the sentiment that I carry with me in my drawing practice. As a Black woman in this space, in this time, there are very specific expectations about who and what I am, how I should look and sound, the work that I should do, as an artist, what my art should look like, and how I should and should not be. And all of this feels very exploitive to me. So for several years, maybe more than 15, I've consciously made work to describe the you that James Baldwin spoke of. I use drawing to question what it means to articulate complexities of otherness. What does it mean to describe my experience through other bodies? White males, ocean waves, a dark storm, or literally a gridded screen veiling the figure. This work unfolds in two parts. The first began as the illustrated guide to not being so fucking racist, which is exactly what you think it is. It's a series of drawings explaining the everyday absurdities that come out of the mouths of racists, or are acted out in typically unnecessary ways. Like a German classmate calling me an imperial oppressor. They grew up in a town occupied by the US military. It's obvious that they failed to make the connection as to why the US military was occupying her German town, or even why I am in the United States at all. Eventually, I began creating small, drawn portraits of white men that I would find in news articles: Warren Buffett, Edward Snowden, Vladimir Putin picking his nose at a funeral. The most recent of this series is actually from 2016, and it's a portrait of a flaccid penis. As you might have guessed, I believe humor and satire can be used as tools to dismantle white supremacy. And as important as that is to me, it isn't a full articulation when it comes to describing the you. The you referring to the United States of America, to the Americas, to Western Europe, to whiteness, and all of our varying proximities to whiteness. I wanted to find something as universal as the anti-Blackness in this world to help all of us understand what I mean when I say complete liberation from the you, which means finding a way of articulating the experience of Black power and identity while denying the exploitation of our bodies. Thinking of Black power operating as deities, such as Ishu or Anansi tricksters in West African and Caribbean spirituality, embodying other cultural and political symbols of protection in search of solidarity and accomplices. Experimenting with symbolic forms found in nature, such as a storm cloud, chopped up rattlesnakes, and resilient plant life. The Akako Nan, a Kan symbol of protection, and geodesic domes. And of course, foo dogs, known as symbols for guarding the home as a structure as well as the family who inhabit the home. I settled on using water as it is both symbolically and literally very important to sustaining life, but may also kill you depending on the situation. Has anyone ever listened to that Fela Kuti song, Water Get No Enemy? Yeah, some people are familiar with it. It's a good song. In this song, Fela Kuti speaks of exactly why water gets no enemy, which is how I want to articulate Black power and liberation as a necessary and life-sustaining presence that can be universally understood. This is the Black Power wave drawing for protest. The process for making this work is similar to the first drawing we looked at, with the exception of being mounted on boards with yardsticks. This drawing is prepared for political action, falling apart and coming together in one single motion. while nodding to the inherent nature of gathering to protest and the ability to break away at a moment's notice, granting mobility within a wave of literal movement. Here's a closer look at a Black Power wave. Graphite marks are inflicted on paper, building texture into 3 dimensions so that light glistens and glints off the surface. The reflective quality of the drawing gives the viewer a sense of their own presence in the work. Heightening the 3D effects of the surface, the drawing features precise cuts. And now, a poem by Assata Shakur entitled Love. You know, it's Valentine's. Love. Love is contraband in hell, because love is an acid that eats away bars. But you, me, and tomorrow hold hands and make vows. That struggle will multiply. The hacksaw has 2 blades. The shotgun has 2 barrels. We are pregnant with freedom. We are a conspiracy. I began this next series of drawings in response to the year 2020, which seems like a lifetime ago, right? Prompted by an exhibition I agreed to participate in at the Aldrich Museum in Ridgefield, Connecticut, entitled 2020. Unbeknownst to me or anyone else involved in this project, this year would bring the type of upheaval that could only be predicted by a clairvoyant ophthalmologist with an acute understanding of the American apartheid system and right-wing conspiracy theories. I began drawing in January of 2020, mostly thinking about the upcoming presidential election. As a Black woman and mother, I was walking into the year with a full and clear understanding that our lives were at stake, that another 4 years of both covert and overt racism from the Trump administration would not only enable the regular violence inflicted against our communities, but would encourage even more harm and destruction, as we can see in these the last month and change. Okay, days before the 2020 U.S. presidential election was to culminate with the final day of voting, there was a march to the polls event in Graham, North Carolina, organized by Reverend Greg Drumright to encourage and support early voting in the community. However, the Graham Police Department decided to pepper spray marchers exactly 14 seconds after a moment of silence that was held for George Floyd. Reading about this and watching Reverend Drumright retell the events of the day, I couldn't help but notice this image that so deeply contrasted with the state violence that marchers were subjected to, as well as the stereotypical negative images of Black protesters that is often found in news coverage. In a time where so many of us were separated from our loved ones, whether it's because of the COVID-19 pandemic or the racist policies that have been separating Black and brown families for generations, this image of 2 people embracing amongst and in spite of the chaos the world is throwing at them seemed to be the most radical thing one could do in this moment. Whether it's on a physical, intellectual, or even emotional level, it made me realize we were all likely looking for something to embrace. A lover, a friend, an AR-15, or maybe an ideology. During presidential election seasons, for as far as I can remember, there is this conversation about the forgotten, the people who feel left behind by the intellectuals, the corporate executives, and politicians. And almost always, these forgotten people are white men. Well, working-class white men, like Joe Plummer. Just the regular, hard-working American who isn't looking for a handout, just wants his fair share. Well, the more I thought about that image and the reality of the working class and the working poor, that didn't match up. The truth is, Black women have always worked in this country, first as enslaved people and then as underpaid workers, doing the undervalued and often invisible labor that is almost never referenced every 4 years. In fact, when we are mentioned during election cycles, we are villainized as welfare frauds or cheats, lazy, lacking education, or good work ethic. If we are educated, we are seen as likely undeserving, but rather manipulative of a system that coddles us through DEI programs and affirmative action. Did I mention that we have always worked in this country, first as enslaved people, deprived of education, forced to labor beyond what should be humanly possible, experimented on in the name of science, and then erased from a conscious understanding of what it means to be forgotten. This drawing is a reclaiming of that space that is held every 4 years for the forgotten worker, by drawing Black women doing the labor that white men are often celebrated for. It includes an image, It includes an image of a Black woman who was carried away by police alongside Bernie Sanders, who is famously remembered in that same moment for his unwavering dedication to the struggle. I chose this specific image to work with because of the facial expression in this figure. It isn't clear, it can't be easily interpreted, and you can see that her arms are being raised in a moment. It could be joy or triumph. It was really important to me to not include images of suffering. Also present in this drawing is my daughter, reclining in a motorcycle jacket and cowboy boots after a long day of work, much like we might imagine the Marlboro Man after his long day of labor. While developing these drawings, I realized another conversation taking shape, the conversation between our past and present circumstances, and of course, a chin up to the future. Oops. For me, this is a direct link to the Sankofa, a phrase in the Akan Twi language of Ghana, which means to take what is useful from the past to help you in the present, or more simply put, to go back and get it. The symbol for Sankofa are two coiled shapes that fold into one another and then back out, mirroring each other. We often see this symbol in gates around New York City, and I happened to once watch an iron worker create these Sankofas for gates outside of my apartment building, one side after the other, imperfectly matching, learning to be not quite, but just enough for you to know and recognize them as the same. So what does it mean to hold this imperfect reflection of something? For me, it meant including historic images to help me tell the truth as it was unfolding. First of 19th century washerwomen in reference to their successful 1881 strike in Atlanta, Georgia, that won them a living wage and set a precedent for organizing labor in the US. Stacey Abrams, who was at the time the most recognizable person in the Black women-led movement organizing in resistance to voter suppression in Georgia during the 2020 election cycle, and the first Black and Asian woman vice president, and the last Democratic Party presidential nominee, Kamala Harris. I'm drawing a direct line between these events, people, and movements to create a connection through these curving lines that are taking shape and holding space for others to pass through as it gazes in and out, back and forward, in spite of everything trying to kill us. Water break. Often when I am drawing, I find myself establishing boundaries in my mark making. First, finding lines to guide me through the forms. Oops. Then building a careful and gradual accumulation of marks in some areas that contrast with masses of texture that are formed through repetitive motion and shifting the direction of cumulative marks. These are all defined by the amount of light that is allowed to remain on the surface of the paper. During the process, I'm looking at these mirrored figures, reevaluating the information I'm taking in from the original image versus what has already been drawn. Noticing that the hair on the right side of Kamala looks more neatly tucked behind the ears than in the mirrored image, I decide to trust what I see in this moment, rather than matching it exactly to its reflection, understanding that the mirrored image was also true to me in its moment of creation. The hands in these drawings play an integral role leading the viewer from one subject to another, while also providing insight into the figure's persona, the past and present holding hands, linking one experience to another, returning, and embrace. Or weaving hellebore into their braids for protection, immersed in a conversation. As an artist and educator and mother, I have prioritized building connections and community through art making, focusing on the experience of making rather than the end product, connecting my internal world to the external through art processes. Over time, what I have found is integral to my art practice is finding pleasure in leisure and boredom, the two things I have been taught I cannot afford to have. The two things that many of us have been told will only lead to laziness, and eventually a life of crime or exploitation worse than the work right in front of us. And in all honesty, the stakes really are that high in the Black community. For generations, we have tried to outrun our oppression by working harder for less and producing more even when we lack the basic necessities for our survival. Living under the constant grind of capitalism does not leave a lot of room for people to connect. Oftentimes, precarious housing or employment situations can leave people with very little capacity to initiate healing rituals, or it complicates the nurturing of deep connections. What I have found as an artist is the importance of creating space for making and reflecting together. Over the years, I have worked to integrate that into my teaching practice as well. Prioritizing making for pleasure and relaxation, generosity through gifts of time, sharing materials, food, resources, and encouragement. Which brings me to the Brooklyn High Art Machine. The Brooklyn High Art Machine is a collaborative public art project that I do with a fellow artist and neighbor, Mildred Beltry. Mildred and I have lived in the same building in Crown Heights, Brooklyn for over 25 years and have been making art with and for our neighbors for the last 15. Over time, this has looked like many things, including weaving messages to our neighbors into the fence of a bridge on our block. With this one, which was up from the summer of 2020 to the summer of 2021, we adapted language from a poem by Leopold Singer that we found in Frantz Fanon's book, Black Skin, White Mask. We wanted to offer these words as a way to acknowledge the loss of life we experienced during COVID and again through over-policing. It was a way to talk about grief and a celebration of our ancestors. The space where the fence weaving exists is a space that essentially divides our block. It is also a space that is supposed to be maintained by the city, but it's not. Activating this space has given us a way to bring the two sides of the block together. Oftentimes, artists are expected to make work in solitude and then present it as a finished product to the public in spaces that they may not be in close proximity to, their homes and personal lives. What's different about this project is that we are making art in the community that we live in for our neighbors. We have to live with the work that we make and navigate relationships with the people that are in continual engagement with the work. Dear friend, where I end, you begin. Through this process, we have learned that being outside and engaging in art making as Black and brown people is to resist the criminalization of our bodies in public spaces. Being an artist in community, I have learned that being outside together can make a sidewalk a creative and generative space for everyone, and that our neighbors look forward to walking down the block before or after a long day to reflect on the day past and the day to come. The end, I'm done. Are we doing a Q&A? Okay. Then yes, I'm done. I will also take answers If anyone has answers, I'm open.
Okay, is that broadcasting now?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So one of my questions was that you're working, realistically from images, and you have a lot. You wrinkles are very important in all the clothes people are wearing, and so I was thinking, so. What is it like? What do you think? What are you trying to do with that? What are you thinking of when you're, doing very labor-intensive of work on textile? And for that matter, what interested you in being very labor-intensive in rendering? Also, just the faces and that taking that approach to working.
I think. So there's so many answers I think I have for that. So drawing for me, I think I had this need to move and fidget. I'm a fidgeter. So I think just mark making in general is a way for me to kind of get my yayas out. That's probably where that started. That was the seed. I also, at a certain point in my life, realized that I needed to make art to feel like a person, to feel like a complete human. I felt like I needed to be making things. And I also learned how I could make it a meditative practice. So I think when I'm drawing, I'm thinking, one, about this meditation. So when it's stuff that I really don't want to do, let's say like there's like a drawing I made where it was like ribbed, a ribbed like tank top, or people call it a wife beater, and I was like, oh my God, this is the most tedious thing ever. Or I was just working on a drawing of someone from like, I think from the 1700s, and they had all these ruffles and then tiny little flowers, and I was just like, I am going to die. I'm going to die for making this. And I had, the self-imposed deadline, and I just decided, after like going over it and making it, like working on it for weeks, I decided I needed to finish it that day, and I was only halfway done, and I just made this decision that I was gonna finish those ruffles that day, and I finished them that day. So I think, for me, it's like I kind of give myself these assignments, and it's part torture, but then when you're done, it feels like triumph. Like you're out. It's like you just broke yourself out of the jail you gave yourself, right? That you put yourself in. Another, I think, driving force for me, especially when I'm doing portraiture, but also I would say like the black power wave drawings, I started thinking of them as like these spiritual acts. Like when I was, like those drawings of Donald Trump even, I'm like, I'm pouring all the bad juju, where are these drawings? There. I'm like, I am cursing this person in my drawing, as where like when I'm drawing like, let's see, where is it? This drawing is my daughter, and I'm just like, I'm blessing her. Or I'm trying to figure out a way to put in like prayers of protection into these drawings. So I think those are like the different things that motivate me. So sometimes it's something good. Sometimes it's like putting myself in drawing jail and trying to break out. Yeah.
Is that on? Okay, good. Oasa, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I mean, just so many interesting moments. I kept thinking about history in so much of your presentation. You talked about Black history, our political history, issues of capitalism, and then kind of wove them together in all of these complex manners. And I thought maybe you might be able to talk a little bit more about your own artistic history. For me, a couple of things came up. I thought about the rich history of people who draw, who are interested in issues of politics and the social and class. I think of people like William Kentridge. And then I thought about Tim Rollins and the Kids of Resistance as well, in terms of the kind of communal projects. And those were just a couple of things that kind of came to my mind, but I thought maybe you could speak to some of your own influences.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that you bring up William Kentridge. It was one of, I think, an exhibition of his was one of the first like museum shows I went to just on my own. And I was so fascinated with the fact that you could make this political art that were drawings and it would end up in a museum. Like I grew up in New York and I grew up going to like hardcore shows. I don't know if people still listen to hardcore, but it was fun back in the day. I don't know what it's like now. But you know, you're going to like CBGB's and the wetlands, and there was, what was it, like Coney Island High, and there were all these like cool zines. People were making really cool shit. And I just thought that was as far as I could go with it. I think like I wanted to be a tattoo artist, and my mom was like, "Oh, well, FIT has a lot of different art and design programs, and your tattoo drawings, they look kind of like textiles. And so I got you this application." That's literally why I ended up going to FIT. And I saw, when I looked at the list of majors and the little information I had, because this was before the internet was a thing, and I was just like, well, fine arts sounds more free. I was like, I don't know if I want to make fabric. Like, that's like too limiting. So I applied to the fine arts program. But yeah, I think William Kentridge was my first introduction to like, oh, there's this whole like world of, I don't know, of like making it for art, for the sake of just making it, rather than like for I don't know, for like an ad or for a zine, and zines are cool. Like I still love zines and making things like that. But that was the first artist that I saw, and I realized that was a thing. And then there was Charles White. After that, I saw Charles White's work, and I mean, just the textures that he builds up, the scale of it was like I wanted to be in that world. Whatever world it is that you can make graphite do that, I was like, I want to live in that world. I don't know if I can do that, but I want to be in that world. Who else do I love? I really liked, this was like later on, but I always thought a lot about like Jim Shaw's work, because it's just all over the place. There's like a certain level of like deviant behavior that goes along with it, like things, he talks about just like how gross the world is in a lot of ways, and I just appreciated that. And then, you know, he would just like make this little drawing, and then he'd make this giant drawing, and I kind of like exploring different materials, so I think those were, I would say, the main artists that I looked at, probably like earlier on. Yeah. There's probably more. Yeah.
Well, while they're going to do that, I have a question that you
Sure.
can table after or answer now. Since you're already talking about, well, first, thank you for your time and just for the work that you're doing culturally, but also artistically, creatively, and just for anchoring it in the history for us as well, and in the social movements that are so valuable to us in this moment, especially. So since you're already talking about like artists that have inspired you, when you were, or I know we're constantly emerging and arriving, but when you were like in your beginnings, what or who or where were kind of giving you life, and I guess what would you offer to yourself now that you're here looking back? What would you kind of give as like guidance or hope? Yeah.
To my younger college self? Yeah. I mean, so when I started college, I already had a child, and I was a little bit older, not much, but just like a couple of years older than other freshmen. And it was kind of, not even kind of, it was very alienating for me. At the time, people weren't as open-minded about people who weren't like them. Maybe it's different now. But I had a really hard time, specifically with students. People would call it bullying. But at the time, it was just people just being shitty for no reason other than like, ew, like she has a kid, ew, like, ew, she's black, like literally that kind of behavior. So I think what I would probably offer to myself at that time, which I think I was already doing it, was like, who the fuck cares what they think? In 10 years, in 5 years, they're not even going to matter. They will be totally irrelevant. At the same time, I had like a few professors, Melissa as well, like who treated me like a human being. Like there were a professor, like when I had a crit, Stephanie DeManuel watched my baby for me. Like it was stuff like that just helped me keep going along with my family. Like I had a very supportive family. There was also just like one particular really awful professor. I think I heard he died. I'm like trying to remember. Huh? Montalto. Did Butch die? Oh. I wasn't talking about Butch. I was talking about Montalto, who was just like a horrible person. And like I'm not even like, oh my God, should I say that? Like he was fucking awful to me and other students. Like I think like if he hadn't been tenured, he probably would have gotten fired for shit that he said to me. But like I think for me it was always about something else. Like going to school for art, it was just this thing, it's this thing that I had to do to get where I wanted to go. And in all honesty, I didn't even know where I wanted to go. Like I knew I wanted to grow as a person, is what I'm saying. And so I was just willing and open to seeing how I could do that. And really like, having kids at a younger age, I wanted to set a good example for them. Unfortunately, they're both artists. Like, I thought I was like setting this like example of like working hard, studying, blah, 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 and you can become a scientist and not an artist like your mother, but they both love the arts. That's another story though. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I feel like you did.
Okay.
Or maybe just the one part about like hope, like what was giving you hope. I mean,
What was giving me hope? Oh, what? Okay, maybe what gives me hope now? Oh shit! Damn it! I think that's one of the reasons why I turned to teaching, because it's working with younger people where you're just like, okay, there still could be hope for humanity, depending where you teach. Like, Because I've also taught, like, in some situations where I'm just like, there is no hope for humanity. But, like, but I think, like, teaching and then also just being in community with people and being open to, like, having relationships, and I don't mean, like, romantic or whatever, but with people who are not like you. Like, I joined this support group years ago, and I met people with this similar a similar issue who were nothing like me. Like, their backgrounds, their life experiences were so different. If I had passed them on the street, I would not assume that they were like dealing with the same problems that I'm dealing with. And then I show up to this space and I find out that I'm just like this person who on the surface seems nothing like me. We have everything in common, it turns out. And I think like that gives me hope, is knowing that I don't know and being open to learning and accepting. Oh.
So my question was just like looking at your pieces, they're just like, I feel like you communicate really well through like motifs and things like that. And I personally have kind of a hard time like trying to communicate what I'm trying to say with imagery whenever either I have trouble with that in general, but it's like as I'm going through the process, it kind of turns into something else that I wasn't intending it to be, or like that's usually how it goes. So I guess I'm just wondering like if you come up with like message concept first or like imagery concept first, or kind of what's the problem?
Yeah, I have like all these ideas, and I'm like, I'm just going to do it like this. This is pretty simple. And then it just takes on a life of its own, and it becomes something totally different. Like, I mean, this in particular was not supposed to look like this, but here it is. These were actually from 2 different drawings that I put together.
Yeah, they all feel like super cohesive and beautiful.
Thanks.
I just want to know what you did to have your work exhibited in a museum at the Met. And also, I just want to say that I just feel like it's cool that, like, when I think of a black artist who's skilled, I'm thinking of a white person. But like, when I see your work, I have an idea like, I can be as skilled as you. So that's basically what I'm trying to say.
You can be what?
As skilled as you.
As skilled?
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
I can do it.
I'm not that good, honestly. I've seen better in classes that I've taught where I'm like, damn, you should be teaching, not me. How do I get my work exhibited? That's really hard. I feel like I didn't know where to start, and I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I would say I am still getting opportunities from the graduate program I was in. Like, people that walked into my open studio in 2009, I still like have relationships with them. They still recommend me for things. For a long time, you know, when I was first starting out, I was just applying to a lot of things, like a lot of like, I don't know how many people are like this, but I really love my home. I have to work so hard to pay the rent to live in my home that I don't like to travel that much. So like the thought of like doing like a month-long residency somewhere and still having to pay rent in my house and like not be in my bed, I'm just like, So I mainly just applied to residencies in New York City. And through that, there was, you know, they bring in curators and other types of art professionals to see your work. So it's those types of introductions that have helped. How my work ended up in the Met Museum collection is I was an educator at the Met for a very long time, and I was teaching a public drawing class on a Friday night, and a friend of mine brought her friend, who was a curator at another museum. Years go by. They were a very nice person, like years go by, he sees my work in another museum, which the project I did for the other museum was with someone I met at Hunter College, and this curator contacted me through DMs on Instagram to say, oh, I saw what you did at the Cooper Hewitt, like, I'd be interested in showing that at the Met. And I was like, I can do better than that. I actually teach at the Met. This is how, like, and I've been making work about an artifact at the Met. And that's how that happened. So I would say, like, sometimes it's just like random connections, but sometimes it's also hard work and just being ready. Like, I know a lot of artists who, like, go to all the openings, they show up to the parties, they do all this stuff. They ain't got no work. They ain't got no work. And so I think, like, most importantly is making the work that you want to make, and then figuring out or, like, finding your community. For a long time, one of the reasons why Brooklyn High Art Machine happened, the public art project, was my neighbor and friend. We were both artists. We didn't have a lot of opportunities, but we definitely had something to say, and we were like, we can say it outside to our neighbors. Like, they'll listen. They're an important audience. So just thinking about it in that way. Yep.
I wanted to ask, and I wrote it down so that I can remember. Mm-hmm. How do you balance your political, social commentary art with the art that you make for yourself or for fun or for family? As far as, like, me and my creative journey, I want to be able to do a lot with my creative side, as well as, like, being able to advocate or make social commentary. Do you find yourself, like, telling, like, oh, I'm gonna make something about, like, the president today, or does it come to you, or, like, how does that work?
I think, especially when you're in school, I'm, like, remembering in graduate school, I was told, like, the political and the personal, I don't know how I feel about you having those together in the same the same work. You're gonna have to figure out one or the other. But that's not being human. That, for me, I think for a long time, like, I took that advice and I was trying to figure out how to change. But really what actually needed to change was my perspective on what I was doing and how I felt about what I was making. So I think it's more so about a mindset and kind of seeing yourself in the world, right? We're not living just in isolation. Artists can pretend that their work is only about the color blue or only about the texture. And those are, important things to think about, but it's never only about that. And so for me, I got into, like, you see a little bit of it here, but in my more recent work, I really got into painting flowers. And people were like, what the fuck are you, like, what is this about? And I'm like, well, that flower represents this for me, and this other flower represents that for me. And when you put it all together, it's about, it's about Black liberation. It's about, like, British colonialism. So it's almost like a mindset and figuring out what you love to do and really understanding what you love about it.
So, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm getting from it is that even, like, while you were at school, like, those things felt intrinsically the same kind of to you, like, your art and
I mean, like, it definitely, like, that's the thing. It's like, it's not like what we're experiencing is not an isolated incident. You know what I mean? Like, it's just everything
comes together.
Yeah,
to, like,
everything affects everything else. Right. So to think about it in another way, you're almost kind of starving yourself of making these important connections and kind of, like, understanding why you're here.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Sure. Go ahead, colleague. Oh.
Hello.
Hey.
I wanted to ask, during your journey as a visual artist, were you ever a perfectionist? And if so, did you ever have to break out of that prison? And also, like, do you do like all the artworks all in one day, or do you like do once a day, or do you like give yourself a timer?
Yeah, I got to break myself out of that prison every day. Every day, that prison of perfectionism, because I will drive myself nuts. I will not leave my house. So yeah, that is a prison breakout on a daily basis. And I usually work on multiple things at a time and kind of just develop things slowly, and then I'll get an opportunity and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm doing this, this, and this, blah, blah, blah. And then I'll suddenly have to like finish a bunch of stuff. So that's usually how I work on stuff.
Yeah, since we were talking about school, and you were a student here, and I was one of your teachers. But so, what do you think now about graduate school and how you felt about it? How is it different from being in undergraduate? And what did you get out of it, or what did you get out of it? I guess what made it worth going to graduate school? But how is it different, especially than your experience here?
I would say in graduate school I was fighting for my life. I was like, and you really have to learn to defend what you do and why you do it. And it's usually, I don't, like obviously, not obviously, but I still have close friends from graduate school. So obviously I made friends in that way. But it was very competitive, very, very competitive. There were people who were just like, I have a gallery, like, I have this, I have that, like, I'm doing this, I know so-and-so, and I honestly, like, I didn't know anybody. Like, I was from New York City. How many people are from here? Okay, so that's amazing. Something happens in graduate school where suddenly, like, only a handful of people are from here, and one, they make fun of your accent, which is crazy because they're also in New York. And two, it gets super competitive in a lot of ways, and you just have to either keep your head down and focus on what you're doing, and you find people who are who have like similar goals or similar interests, and you trust them. You don't, like, if you are, if you're a sculptor, maybe don't trust the guy who is, making paintings of red Corvettes, because that was a thing when I was there. I'm like, I can't take your advice. Like, you don't take life seriously.
I guess my question is more of a technical question. I see that the mirroring is a recurring piece of a lot of your works. I was just wondering how you came about incorporating that mirroring in your work. From experience working realistically, I wonder if it came from a need to add more visual interest to a piece, or if it's woven into the themes of each piece. I guess I'm more interested in how it evolved in the beginning of your practice and how you made a conscious choice to keep it as a recurring thing?
Yeah, it's, can you hear me? Oh, sorry. For me, it's deeply spiritual. I would go back to the Sankofa symbol. And like I said earlier, like I was thinking a lot about history and just this act of like looking back, right? And taking what's useful from that. And so it's just something I started playing with. I think I was playing with it, I started playing with it in 2020. And I didn't want to just think about it in this way of like perfectionism. So nothing is exactly the same, right? Every time, every side of it, when I looked at it, I only looked at that side, really. And even when I noticed, like I said, like Kamala's hair is more neatly tucked on one side than the other, I just kept it because in that moment, that's what the image was giving me. And so, yeah, for me, I'm thinking of it more in like, yeah, of like, this is a spiritual act. Thank you, guys.